We're going to begin with Berchas Kohanim. I've muted everybody, so please answer Amen at home. It's just easier to do a sermon with all the sound off. I want to dedicate the Berchas Kohanim today to a very special Kohen whose neshama, his soul, went to the heavenly world today, and he was buried on the very same day. Our very own Rabbi Leibel Kahanav Zedi, his grandfather, passed away. His name was Sholem Chaim Osher HaKayin Kahanav. His neshama should have an aliyah. He should go higher and higher in the heavenly worlds and watch over his entire family, watch over all of his children, his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren. Vayadaber dinei Moshe Lemor, daber alam Rabban Lemor, Kesevaruch Osmnei Yisrael, Emor Lohem. Ya 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 ma ya 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 ma ya 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 Yivarechecho Adonai ay 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 V'yishmerecho ay 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 ma ya 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 ma ya 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 Yoed Adonai ay 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 Oh no. Ay 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 ma ya 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 ma ya 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 Elecho Amam 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 ay 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 Vichoneko ay 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 ma ya 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 ma ya 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 Yeso Adonai ay 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 Oh no. Ay 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 ma ya 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 ay 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 Elecho ay 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 Yosei ma ya 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 ma ya 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 ay 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 L'cho amam hamam 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 ay 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 Shalom. The Lord bless you and guard you. The Lord make his countenance shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his countenance toward you and grant you peace. Master of the universe, we have carried out that which you have decreed on us. You deal with us as you have promised us. Look down from your abode, from heaven, and bless your people Israel and the land which you have given us, as you have sworn to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. We enter now the second days of Passover. Shvi shel Pesach, the seventh day of Pesach, and Achron shel Pesach, the last day of Pesach. The splitting of the sea is the seventh day of Pesach. Tonight we commemorate the miraculous event, the conclusion of the Exodus. For so long as the Egyptian army was still intact, although they left Egypt, they still felt the threat of the Egyptian army and of Pharaoh. And the splitting of the sea brought that to a culmination, and that's why they broke out in song, not when they left Egypt, but they broke out in song, as Yashir Moshe B'nai Yisrael, when the splitting of the sea took place. And thus the celebration tonight and tomorrow is all about the splitting of the sea. It's about the culmination of the Exodus. But then we have the last day of Pesach. We have Achron Shel Pesach. And that last day of Pesach, our focus has to be on the future redemption. The focus is on Moshiach, our belief in Moshiach, our yearning for Moshiach, our demanding for Moshiach, and our readiness that any moment indeed Moshiach would come. And therefore, the focus and the Haftorah of the day, of the 8th day of Pesach, is all about the coming of Moshiach. So these are two very joyous days. Both the 7th day and the 8th day of Pesach are extremely joyous. In fact, there's far more joy in these 2 days than even in the first days, because as I mentioned, the 7th day represents the conclusion of the Exodus, and the 8th day, the conclusion of all exiles of all time of Moshiach's coming. And yet this year we celebrate the 7th day of Pesach and the 8th day of Pesach, and we're still gripped with fear and with anxiety. Our country and most of the world is still on lockdown. Relatives and close friends are quite ill back home in Brooklyn. Many of our leaders of our community have passed away. And so there's still that element of sadness, and yet at the same time, the holiday comes and tells us, be joyous, v'samachta b'chagecha. And so how do we deal with this contradiction of, on one hand, there is the sense of sadness, on the other hand, there's a commandment for joy. And King David says it best. He writes in the book of Tehillim, he writes the words, Gilu birada, that we, the Jewish people, we know how to rejoice while we're trembling. That we have this ability to cry and laugh simultaneously. And it's been a part of our journey. It's been part of our history. Years ago, there was a barber in Encino. His name was Leon, that I would go to. And he would be the only barber that I would ever go to. And I went to him for some 20 years. And you couldn't help but notice the tattooed numbers on his arm. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he would often talk about what it was like in the concentration camps. He saved his life by being a barber in the concentration camp. And he told me what it felt like for him to have to cut the hair of the Gestapo and SS members that murdered his father, his mother, his brothers, and his sisters. And yet that was the only way he was able to stay alive. Leon was a very special man, a very sweet, sweet person. Anyway, there was a few times during this 20 years, a few weeks, that I tried calling for an appointment and there was no answer. And I was worried, what's going on with Leon? Why is he not answering the phone? And then finally, a few weeks later, he picks up the phone. I said, I was wondering where you are. You know, I already had this Samson look going on. Something that is going to be happening soon because there was no places open before Pesach, and now we don't cut our hair for the next 7 weeks. So you're going to get used to Rabbi Samson over the next few weeks. But I said, I came and I had my appointment with Leon, and I said, no, where were you? He said, Moshe, I went. Where did you go, Leon? I finally went. Where did you go? I went to Eretz Yisrael. For the first time in his life, he went to Israel. And he says, you know, a strange emotion came over me. Wherever I went, I started crying. Whatever I saw, I started crying. I saw an Israeli soldier holding a gun. I started crying. Someone defending our land, defending ourselves. You can imagine the flashbacks he had. I saw the Kotel HaMaravi. I started crying. Whatever I saw, I started crying. And you can think from his perspective what these tears represented. Were they tears of sadness or were they tears of joy? Or were they tears of both? Gilu berada. Because the emotion of what he experienced in his youth, the emotion of what he misses from his parents' home is there, but at the same time, he's laughing. He's laughing, he's rejoicing. We have this remarkable condition. It's a spiritual schizophrenia that we can cry and we can laugh at the same time. We can rejoice and we can tremble all at once. It's an awesome, overwhelming phenomenon of the Jewish people. A number of years ago, the Polish government, they held an event in which they commemorated the 85th anniversary of the Polish Air Force. This is not a joke. It's not a Polish joke. They really had this commemoration. So they were inviting all countries to come and to send contingencies of their jets, of their own air forces to the country to mark this celebration. And they invited the Israeli Air Force to send some of their F-15s to join in the celebration. So Israel remarked to Poland, They thought about it, and they said they would be willing to send a delegation with their F-15s, but only on the condition that they be allowed to fly over the Auschwitz concentration camp first. So the curators of the Auschwitz Museum objected, and they said, you're not going to disturb the silence of the Auschwitz memorial with your sounds, loud sounds of an F-15. But the Israeli Air Force stood strong on their demand, and they said, we're not going to come unless indeed there's going to be the allowance for us to fly our jets over the concentration camp. And the Polish government gave in. And on that incredible day, this contingent of Israeli F-15s, each piloted by children or grandchildren of Auschwitz survivors, took off towards the sacred and sorrowful resting place of their parents and their grandparents. In the cockpits, the crew members carried with them the names of all those recorded murdered in Auschwitz some decades earlier. The jets, proudly displaying the Star of David, the Magen David, flew to the concentration camps as slowly as possible. They followed the railroad tracks leading to the camps and the crematoriums. And then as soon as they made their way right over the gas chambers, they peeled up, straight up with this loud and mighty screech to make a statement. It's a new day for the Jewish people. I'm sure that as they flew over the graves of their parents and their grandparents, they cried bitter tears. But amidst their tears, they laughed, a roaring laugh. Am Yisrael Chai. We have survived because we're still here, because we're strong. We read a Haftorah this past Shabbos, one of the most powerful Haftorahs of the year. I hope you had a chance to look into it on Shabbat. If not, take some time and look in the Siddur on the Haftorah that was read this past Shabbat Chalamot Passover. It's one of the most famous prophecies of all of Tanakh. It's from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37. And it's known as the prophecy of dry bones. And in this chapter, God lifts Ezekiel and he carries him to a valley. And the valley is told is filled with bones, human bones, many bones, but they're dry bones. And God asks Ezekiel, and he says, Son of man, can these bones become alive? And Ezekiel responds, God, only you alone know. And God commands Ezekiel to speak to the bones and to tell the bones that a spirit will enter them and they will come back to life, and flesh and skin will grow back on the bones, and life and spirit and the soul will all return. Ezekiel does as he's told. And there arose a noise, the prophecy says, behold, a commotion, the bones, they were coming together, bone to bone. And Ezekiel says, and I looked, and lo and behold, sinews were upon them, and flesh came upon them, and skin covered them from above, but there was still no spirit in them. God says to Ezekiel, prophecy, O son of man, and say to the spirit, so says the Lord God, from four sides, come, O spirit, and breathe into these slain ones that they may live. Ezekiel did as he was commanded, and the spirit came into them, and they lived, and they stood on their feet. The prophet tells us it was an army of people, a very great, large army of people. And God says to Ezekiel, son of man, these bones are all the house of Israel. Behold, they say, Yavshu atzmoisenu. They cried to me that their bones have become dried up. Avda tikvaseinu, our hope is lost. Nigzarnu lanu, we're cut off. So says God, lo, I open your graves and cause you to come out of your graves as my people, and I will put my spirit into you, and you shall live. And I will set you on the land of Israel. And you should know that I, the Lord, have spoken it and have performed it. So says the Lord. You see, since the very beginning of Jewish history, we have found ourselves preoccupied with surviving. The whole story of Passover, the story of Pharaoh, The Babylonians, the Romans, the pogroms, the Inquisitions, the Holocaust, exile after exile was scattered. We're living amongst the nation. The phrase, a lamb amongst the 70 wolves, that's been our existence. And that should have been the end of the Jewish story, its final chapter, because conquest and exile and dissolution, it brings the end of the fate of any other nation. Great empires, when they are defeated, they fade away. They leave only pottery buried beneath the grounds. Because once a nation has been plundered, they're faded into history books. They become part of museums. You see, dry bones remain buried beneath the ground. The Jewish people are the only ones that broke that mold. Yes, they were defeated, and Jerusalem and the Holy Temple were decimated. But we knew we were not put here on earth to fade away. We had this will to survive, and it's embedded in our soul. It's in our psyche. And every time that it appeared that the Jewish spark would be extinguished, that the Sinai mission would come to a halt, somehow, miraculously and courageously and mysteriously, the dry bones keep coming back to life. I heard a story about a group of Jews while being led into the gas chambers. One of them started singing a song in Yiddish. The song went, Lomer sich iberbeten. Lomer sich iberbeten means it's time to ask God for forgiveness for our sins, for the sins we've done in our lives. The song didn't catch on because no one felt at that time that they needed to ask God for forgiveness for anything. Someone did a slight change on the words, used the same song, the same words almost, but he changed it. Instead of saying Meveln sich ze iberbeten, he said Meveln sich ze iberleben, which has an entirely different meaning. It means we will out-survive them. So as the Nazis, Yamach Shemom, were leading the Jews into their death, into a gas chamber, these Jews were singing, we will out-survive you. We will live. You will fade away. Because they knew the promise of Ezekiel, they knew the promise of the Haftorah that we just read, that the dry bones will always come back. We will come back again and again and again. So just a few years after the final solution, Eretz Yisrael, the land of our prayers, the land of our dreams, the land of our past, the land of our present, and the land of our future. The land from which we were exiled for thousands of years was back in Jewish hands. In the span of 1 decade, we went from being on the brink of extinction to a land of our own, a land with open and revealed miracles. Anyone that studies any part of modern day Israel history must acknowledge miracle after miracle after miracle. You know, we talk about the prophecies of Isaiah when he talks about that at the end of days, in the times of Moshiach, Jewish families and communities who were exiled from their homeland from all over the world for thousands of years in exile will come back to the Holy Land of Israel. And he says they will fly on the wings of eagles. There's other prophecies that say that we're going to fly on clouds. Now, maybe it'll be clouds, maybe it'll be eagles. But for a nice period of time after the establishment, the reestablishment of Israel into our hands, we saw these wings of eagles. We saw these airplanes coming filled with Jews from all corners of the world. In 1949, Israel airlifted 50,000 Jews from Yemen. Most of them never saw an airplane in their lives. So you can imagine when the Israeli government organized that these Jews be brought to the tarmac and be brought to an airport and be put on a plane. What is it that you think they thought they were entering into? The wings of eagles. And they were brought back to their homeland. In 1950, it continued. 120,000 Jews from Iraq were airlifted home. And each and every few months thereafter, from another country and another country and another country, the prophecies, the miracles, you were seeing it with your very eyes. The 6-day war, miracle after miracle, each and every single minute of that war, the recapturing of Yerushalayim, of our eternal capital, the picture, the image of those soldiers touching the Kotel HaMaravi for the first time in their lives. Miracles, open and revealed miracles. And then in 1990, the Soviet curtain falls. And over 1 million Jews from the old Soviet Empire are brought to their homeland. 1 million people needing food, needing jobs, needing a home, needing money, needing clothing. An airlift the size of 1/6 of its country. It is unheard of in world history that a country in a span of months will take in 1/6 of the population of their entire country, house them, give them jobs, take care of their medical needs and their dental needs and their school needs and their educational needs. And yet Israel didn't complain. They celebrated the opportunity. They danced with the new immigrants coming into their land, for they knew that they were witnessing the fulfillment of prophecies. They were seeing miracles unfold before their very eyes. They took a Jerusalem that lay in mourning and in ruins, and they brought it back to life. Yerushalayim Habnuya. You walk in the streets of the Yerushalayim today, unfortunately not right now because it's a little bit empty, but prior to the coronavirus, and you see its vibrancy, it's alive. You see the fulfillment of prophecies, miracle after miracle. We read this prophecy of Ezekiel so differently than our grandparents read it. We read it as reality. We read it as the newspaper of modern times. We see the dry bones have come back to life. How many of you remember July 4th, 1976, not because it was bicentennial in our country, but because it was also a day of miracles, the most heroic, endearing rescue mission of all times, where Israel goes ahead and rescues those Jews who were trapped in Uganda airport. Our blood was not going to be cheap anymore. Never again meant something now. A new day dawned for the Jewish people. You know, there are more yeshiva students today in Israel than ever before in our history. That's in our history. It's a new day. The dry bones have come back to life. Ezekiel was talking to us, was talking to our generation, was telling us to be ready when you see these miracles unfold and you see what's happening with our very eyes. We know that we're oh so close. Mentioned before the collapse of the Soviet Union. It happened before our eyes. And we saw day after day another country fall and another country fall and another country fall. And the greatest miracle of it all was that there were no tanks and no jets and no bombs and no missiles. It just happened spontaneously. The signal was given from the Almighty and it happened. We need to get used to that. The things that come from the above, from the Almighty, happen keheref ayin, like the blink of an eye. You know, during the collapse of the Soviet Union and all of the communist countries around, they say an estimated 6 million Jews found their freedom. According to Jewish tradition, there was somewhere between 2 and 3 million Jews that left Egypt during the Exodus. And we have been celebrating that event and eating that matzah because of it for 3,332 years. 6 million Jews found their freedom in our lifetime. Do you begin to grasp? Do you understand the magnitude of the miracles that we have lived through in our lifetime? So says God Almighty to Ezekiel, from 4 sides come, O Spirit, and breathe into these dry bones so that they may live. And the Spirit came into them and stood on their feet, an army of people, a very great, large army of people. We have seen the dry bones coming back to life. We have seen us coming out of a Holocaust stronger than before. We have seen Eretz Yisrael. We have seen the old Soviet Union, but we've also seen the dry bones of the United States of America. The assimilated Jew yearning and searching. They don't want to be dried anymore. They want to be alive. They want to feel the vibrancy of Yiddishkeit. They want to feel the beauty of our heritage. They want to embrace the mitzvahs. And first tens, and then hundreds, and now thousands of Chabad centers open in every single part of the country and the world. College campuses, one after the next, with college students and C teams of all Jews, of all walks of life, yearning to be part of Ezekiel's prophecy. No more shall we be dry bones. We're coming back to life. And we have witnessed this more than any generation that has ever been before us. God says to Ezekiel, and God says to all of us, Son of man, these bones are the house of Israel. Behold, they say, Yavshuatz Moseinu, our bones have become dried up. Avda tikvaseinu, our hope is lost. Nigzar nolanu, we are cut off. Now look, is our hope lost? Have we not seen these miracles unfold before our eyes? Therefore, says all the Almighty, I open your graves and I cause you to come out of your graves as my people. I will put my spirit into you and you shall live. And I will set you on the land of Israel, and you shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken it and have performed it. And so, yes, amidst the turmoil, we believe. Amidst the turmoil, we celebrate because we can taste it, we can feel it, we know it. If we have learned anything from the past few weeks, is that which we have always seen as reality can change so drastically in the blink of an eye. Well, the same will happen with the coming of Moshiach. Reality, the reality of the world, will change keheref ayin, in the blink of an eye. As I emailed out to the community and to friends and supporters, on this Thursday, I will go to the shul by myself. I will daven there. Then I will recite the Yizkor. And I will say the Yizkor for my father, Olav Shalom. Then I will recite the Yizkor for all of your loved ones that have emailed me the names of your fathers and mothers and bubbies and zaydis and uncles and aunts, husbands and wives. In the past 72 hours since I sent out the email, I've received over 1,000 names. 1,000 names. And although there will be that moment of sadness, standing in an empty shul, on Achron Shal Pesach, on the holy day, on the festive day, the last day of Pesach. In the days of Yizkor, the days that the shul was always crowded. And you will feel and you will sense the loneliness, the aloneness. But at the same time, I know that I will be joined with over 1,000 neshamas, over 1,000 holy souls. Your loved ones will be in that shul and will be with you as we celebrate Achron Shal Pesach. So we rejoice with trembling, although there's still that element of grief. Nevertheless, we rejoice, for we know that these neshamas, these holy souls of our loved ones, who will make their visit to us on the day of Yizkor, that it will very soon turn into a day where their visit will not be temporary, will not be just during the reciting of Yizkor, but their visit will be a permanent visit, that there will be the resurrection of the dead, that there will be Tchias HaMesim, and our loved ones will come back, for they have earned it in their lifetime of struggle that they have gone through, in their commitment to Yiddishkeit and to God and to keeping this chain of Yiddishkeit continue all the way from Sinai till today. May it happen speedily in our days with the coming of Moshiach Tzidkenu, that we celebrate neshamas begufim, that we celebrate souls within bodies, and that indeed we all dance together and we celebrate. May it happen indeed, Moshiach now. A good yontif, a good yontif, a good yontif.